Okay, now you're recording. Okay. Well, this takes a little bit of getting used to. Night fear. This is just a test run to see how it works. See if I can make it happen. Night Fear by Frank Belknap Long. In the big house upstairs, a child was sobbing. Dr. Brannon could hear the sobs from the foot of the stairs, and his nearsighted eyes grew troubled. It was more than he could understand. Johnny wasn't a maladjusted youngster starved for sympathy and affection. He was a perfectly normal 7-year-old, fond of games and well-liked by his playmates. A self-reliant, confident lad, even if he did have a way of smiling which made him seem wise beyond his years at times. Dr. Bannon tried hard to swallow his fear as he climbed the stairs. For the first time in 10 years, he felt really old, weary and baffled and old. He found himself thinking of Johnny's pretty young mother and how hard she had tried to spare her son the loneliness and dread which had cast a shadow on her own childhood. Even unto the third generation, he thought, and for an instant bitterness tightened his lips and drove the gentleness from his eyes. Why should a child playing with other children in the warm, bright sunlight feel a sudden terrifying sense of insecurity? What could have darkened the sunlight for him and undermined his confidence in himself? Dr. Brannon glanced nervously at his watch. Try as he might, he could not rid his mind of the alarming hour-old memory of a laughing, healthy child, eclipsed by a white-faced stranger with tormented eyes and tear-stained cheeks. Psychologists were always harping on the almost miraculous sanity of childhood, its freedom from morbidity, its joyous acceptance of life as a shining, untarnished coin. How blind they were not to realize that children were at the mercy of night fears, great shadowy winged creatures which could inflict cruel wounds and go flapping off into the darkness, leaving their small, terrified victims in full flight from reality on a plane incomprehensible to adults. It is always a trying moment when an elderly physician must win the confidence of a young patient by absolutely untried methods. Dr. Brannon could still hear himself asking, "What frightened you, Johnny? What did you talk it over with other children? Is that why you're so frightened?" He might as well have saved his breath. Johnny hadn't wanted sympathy of a wheezing, red-faced old fool of a doctor. The door of Johnny's room was ajar. Dr. Brannon could hear Johnny's mother moving about and making a difficult situation worse by talking to her son as if he were still a tot of 3 with a stubborn streak and a bad case of sulks. With an impatient grimace, he stepped into the room and shut the door quickly behind him. "Well, Johnny, how do you feel now?" he asked. "Don't you think we'd better have another little talk, man to man?" Johnny's mother ceased rearranging the pillows at her son's back and straightened with a sigh that was half a sob, and the bedside lamp casting a circle of radiance about her pale hair. "I'm sure he'll talk to me now," Dr. Brannon said, conscious of a faint irritation with the woman for being so beautiful 7 years after the death of her husband. Somehow the mother of an ailing child who was not a little worn looking grated obscurely on his sense of propriety. Propriety? Yeah, propriety. In utter silence, he drew up a chair, sat down, and looked at the lad on the bed over the top of his spectacles. He saw Johnny's face as a misty oval, the eyes darkly shining. He coughed and adjusted his glasses. Seeing Johnny's face clearly, he felt a curious helplessness which his reason could not justify. Surely Johnny wasn't beyond help. He wasn't physically ill or running a fever. His mother had perhaps unwisely put him to bed and pulled down the shades, leaving him for a full hour in deep darkness. Naturally, he would be blinking now, and confused and resentful. He couldn't possibly be as tormented as he looked, as inwardly beyond hope of rescue. Dr. Brannon hitched his chair nearer to the bed, and the smile that came to his face was slow and friendly. "If you were away at school, I could understand your not wanting to talk about it," he said. "Strangers might not know what a brave lad you really are. But I know, Johnny. Surely you can talk freely to an old friend in your own home." For an instant, Johnny drew back as if in top of the hour. Cool. For an instant Johnny drew back as if in secret pain. Then abruptly he leaned forward, his eyes accusing, his hands tightly clenched. "This isn't my home," he said, and his voice seemed no longer the voice of a child, but that of some aging wanderer shaken by despair and wretchedness. Dr. Brannan stared for a long moment into the bewildered, angry eyes in shocked disbelief. Then his lips tightened, and he said in a tight voice that was almost a whisper, "So you found that out at last, lad." Johnny's mother straightened as if stung by a hornet. "How could he find out?" she breathed. "None of the other children knew." "How did you find out, Johnny?" Dr. Brannan asked. Johnny shook his head, then looked away very quickly. "All right, Johnny," Dr. Brannan said gently. "Keep it to yourself if you wish." He turned around to face Johnny's mother. "You can't keep secrets from some youngsters," he said. "You just can't, that's all. It's as great a folly as trying to hide a jam pot on the high shelf. Most likely the other children knew just enough to enable him to put two and two together." Dr. Brannan shook his spectacles and blew upon them. "Children's minds are tricky. When a lad like Johnny puts two and two together, he'll come up with a figure that cuts across all mathematical boundaries. Not four, mind you, but a figure that cuts much closer to the truth." Johnny's mother sat down on the side of the bed, put her arm around him and kissed him. "Johnny," she whispered. Dr. Brannan's eyes had a glint that might have been compassion or amusement or both. "Your mother's here, Johnny," he said. "Doesn't that make it your home?" "No, it doesn't." "You're afraid, lad, is that it? For the first time in your life you feel lost and afraid and alone?" There was a quick, answering look of torment in Johnny's eyes. "Good lad," Dr. Brannan said. "Someday, Johnny, you'll answer all the well-meant questions fearlessly. It's the only way we can give and receive help in the loneliness and the darkness." Dr. Brannan pushed his chair and stood up. "I'm going to prove to you that you have a home, Johnny," he said. "There's something you've got to face, and we're going to face it together." At the door he paused to speak to Johnny's mother. Get him ready," he said. "I'll be back in 20 minutes." When Dr. Brannan returned, Johnny was ready. If Dr. Brannan had moved wearily before, he now seemed to bear the weight of the world on his shoulders. "All right, lad," he said. "We might as well get going." Dr. Brannan took Johnny by the hand, and together they descended the stairs of the big silent house, moving slowly and awkwardly. Then out across a sun-drenched playroom they went, and down a long sloping corridor with shining walls. Doors opened at their approach with an eerie droning and closed noiselessly behind them. 5 doors with winking lights, and then they were in another corridor which was almost a tunnel, and a cold wind seemed to blow in upon them. At the end of the corridor they halted, and Dr. Brannan said, "You were born here, Johnny. For all the years of your life this has been your home, a good home, Johnny. A home to be proud of. I was not born here, but the sunlight up above is as warm and bright as the sunlight I knew as a child." "It's not a real sunlight," Johnny said. "No, of course not, but it's just as healthful. You see, lad, even now, we who should be strong and self-reliant sometimes become frightened. We let ourselves become frightened, and it is very foolish." Dr. Brannan pressed Johnny's hand. "We thought we could protect you from the cold and the dark, to keep you from feeling lost and afraid for the very few happy years before 8. We of an old generation had a less secure childhood." Dr. Brannan scratched his ear. "I'm afraid you were not too successful. You were too smart for us. Youngsters really know how to cut corners to get at the truth, and when they do," he smiled, "there's a fine kettle of fish to unboil, lad." Dr. Brannan tightened his grip on Johnny's hand. "So now, for the first time, you'll see your home as it really is. I'll tell you how it became your home, and you'll be proud. You'll be so very proud of the men who gave their lives to make it your home, you'll forget to be afraid. Now, remember what I told you. That spacesuit is heavy and weighs you down, but away from the station's artificial gravity, you'll be as spry as the harvest mouse in a field of summer corn." Dr. Brannan pressed a button, and there was a steady humming sound. Dr. Brannan said slowly, "Now put on your oxygen helmet, lad. That's right. Just let it settle gently on your shoulders, the way your father did when the Earth was forever behind him. And he walked from the rocket with the courage of a true pioneer." For a moment Dr. Brannan seemed to grow in stature, as if in the bracing of his shoulders had added a cubit to his height. Then the airlock swung open, and the man and the boy walked forward together and emerged hand in hand on the cold, dark surface of the moon. More to come.